A friend of mine came to me the other day and he said, Doug, I want to talk about marriage a little bit. I said, oh, marriage, it's grand. He said, yeah, Doug, but divorce, that's about 10 grand. The topic of today's Goldstein on Gelt show is divorce. Now, if this is not a topic that's relevant to you, and I hope that everything is going okay, then maybe this episode isn't for you. But as a cross-border financial advisor, I deal a lot with people who are dealing with questions of divorce, and I really think it's important that we cover a number of the issues. So I don't mean to make light of anything by telling jokes, although sometimes just the Goldstein on Gelt show is such a good show that it gets a little bit funny that way. But I am going to talk about a rather serious topic today, and I'm going to try to give you, whether they're just pointers or things you can bring up with your lawyer or accountant if you're dealing, or your own financial advisor, or if you need help, you can always get in touch with me. Then I hope that I hope you'll get a few takeaways that'll just make your life a little bit easier. When this guy I was talking to started talking to me about divorce, he said to me, Doug, divorce is like algebra. I said, what do you mean? He said, you look at your ex and wonder why. All right, let's dive right in. Enough for the jokes. So one of the first things that happens when you begin to think about divorce and you talk to your friends about it is they are frequently filled with advice. Now, although that advice might come from the heart and might be with all good intention, it is so common that the advice that they give is just crummy advice. Hopefully, they don't have a lot of experience themselves. And frequently, they're just picking up ideas from literally what they might have seen on a TV program. So if you're going to begin the process of thinking about getting divorced, make sure that you get really, really good advice. And that advice is most likely not going to come from a friend. Next, as things are moving in that direction, you want to consider, what do you spend? Because there's going to be a lot of expenses involved, but just the basic expenses. Now, I always tell people as a financial planner, how much money, know how much money you spend. In fact, a funny thing that happens to me frequently is when I ask people what's their monthly budget, either they say, Doug, I have no idea what I spend, or they say some number, and it turns out that it's completely off. Or the funniest thing is, the husband says, oh, we spend about $4,000 or $5,000 a month. And the wife says, no, we don't. We spend $9,000 or $10,000 a month. This is not a little difference. This is not an accounting difference. This is a major difference. And the fact is, most people have no idea what their outflow is. If you just want to get started, good for you. Start studying what your budget is. But if you're in a situation where things are falling apart a little bit, begin to really, really keep track of what your expenses are. Now, not only what are your expenses, but you need to begin to think about anticipating future expenses. In the event of a divorce, there are, of course, going to be legal fees, and there may be child support and some sort of alimony, and you may need a holiday after that to deal with it, or you won't be taking any holidays anymore. Anything that may change is something you want to begin to anticipate. So spend the time to really consider what are the expenses that you have and that you're going to have. Next, begin to put together all of the documentation related to anything financial in your life. So whether this is the statements from your checking account or your bank account or your credit cards, get copies of that, put them off-site. You also want to get copies of the retirement statements and the brokerage statements, and make sure they're up to date, not something from 4 years ago that you found in the bottom of a shoebox. Go online and download what you have. Anything that's up to date is going to be important, because this is going to help you to determine what your financial situation is. When you meet with a financial advisor, let me say it like this. When I meet with people who have U.S. investment accounts, that's my specialty, I tell them, bring me a copy of your statement, because that's going to give me a huge amount of information that I can use to help you. If you just say, well, I think we had a brokerage account that had $2 or $3 million in it. First of all, there's a big difference between $2 and $3 million. And secondly, I need to know how it's invested, because that'll help me to help you to determine what you should be negotiating for in terms of dividing the assets. If you have any loans, mortgages, anything like that, you want to make sure that you have copies of those statements. If you have contracts related to real estate, make sure you have copies of those statements. Any pay stubs, right? If you have in Israel we call it a talush maskoret, your monthly pay stub, make sure you have that. And at the same time, grab a copy of a recent tax return, last year's tax return. Download it so you have a PDF of it saved somewhere. Email it to yourself so you have it somewhere. And if there are any other assets that you can think of, just write them down on a list with as much information you can think of in order to make sure that you don't forget anything. It's easy when everyone's cooperating in a divorce, everyone works together, but unfortunately there is, I would say in every case I've dealt with, there's always been some sort of resistance, some sort of, well, I mean, let's face it, when people are getting divorced, it's because they're saying, I don't really want to work with you anymore on this relationship. And in a good chance, they probably don't want to work with you in terms of finances. So you need to prepare for all of that. Another thing to really consider, one of the stories that we've heard, and frankly I've seen it happen, is that people sometimes have a baby because they think that's going to solve the problem. They're having marital problems, they have a baby, they say, what we need is a family. And it doesn't help, and it just leads normally to more trouble in the divorce. Similarly, people might say, maybe if we just had a bigger house, or if we bought a new car, if we had a second car or a third car, or we went on vacation more, all of a sudden they're making these big financial decisions. The core of a divorce is not because you have the wrong car or the wrong house. I'm not a marriage therapist, I'm not going to go into it. It's normally more related to how you communicate and how you get along with each other. They're not specific issues which could be solved. There are frequently issues that are much more difficult to solve. Whether to buy a car or a house, frankly, is a much easier problem to solve than I can't stand being with this person in the same room. So I think that these are issues to keep in mind, and so you want to refrain from making any big financial decisions if you're heading in the direction of divorce. So if your spouse says, I think we should talk about this, try to delay it, right? Next, and what goes along with this is, in a divorce, there's frequently a lot of cash moving out, whether it's to pay the fees to the lawyers or to your spouse or soon-to-be ex-spouse. A lot of this is going to be happening, and it's going to be happening very fast, and so you want to begin to squirrel away money, put money aside, build up your reserve fund, build up your emergency fund, build up money in your savings account, in your checking account. That's money you're going to need to have. Don't worry about, my checking account or my savings account doesn't pay a good interest rate. That's the least of your problems. The real problem is going to be liquidity. And finally, it's very important that you get the right type of help. What I started by saying in the beginning was, don't get help from people who don't have experience in helping. A friend, a family member, a sibling. Listen, they may have your best interest in mind, and certainly listen to them. And maybe they can help you to go to your professional. But the bottom line is, make sure you're speaking to a lawyer, someone who has experience in this. In Israel, it's even a little bit more complicated. We have religious courts and we have secular courts, and people have all sorts of myths that they believe about this. And I will tell you, when I've spoken to different lawyers, I get all sorts of different stories, because when I deal with the clients who are getting divorced, I'm often talking to their lawyers as well. You want to have a team that's working for you that really understands your situation. That's what's going to help you to get through this as smoothly as possible. Okay, so those were a number of ideas. I just wanted to lay it out on the table. And again, I'm sorry if it's kind of a downer of a Goldstein and Gelt show. This is not meant to be in any way legal advice or accounting advice or investment advice. I'm simply trying to give you some tactics that might be relevant in your situation if divorce is in your future. If you have any questions or concerns, and again, I deal with people who are living in Israel who have U.S. investment portfolios, and if you think we might be able to help you, then feel free to sign up for one of the free cross-border financial evaluations that we offer at our corporate website, profile-financial.com/call. So again, that's profile-financial.com/call. And there you can sign up for a free cross-border financial evaluation where we'll ask you a lot of questions about your situation. And that information is what we're going to use to determine if and how we can actually help you out. I hope this was helpful. I'd like to thank my team. I'd like to thank Steve Stewart, my chief engineer, Yosef Goldstein, my producer. I'd like to thank Batsheva Goldstein, the website designer, and I'd like to thank all of you. I know there are a lot of choices out there in terms of what you listen to. I appreciate your listening to the Goldstein and Gelt show, hopefully subscribing, and maybe even leaving a 5-star review. And if this episode is relevant to anyone you think might be able to benefit, please be sure to forward it to them. Thanks again. I'm Doug Goldstein. See you next time on the Goldstein on Gelt Show, the financial podcast for people living in Israel.